Hey, how's it going, Jen? Oh, you're muted.
How about now? Sorry.
That's okay. We just tried to realize we had to plug in our computer, and it actually caused everything to short out in the office.
Okay, so we're offline now?
No, we're still very much online, so we're good to. The laptop managed to hold everything going. So actually, we are finally here on for this webinar, The Brave New World. I want to thank anybody who's logged on so far. We have 11 participants on so far. I think we have about 18 that are coming. And anyway, it's going to be a really good day. Hopefully lots of informative conversations occur. And as we go, we apologize for any of our technical hiccups that might happen along the way, but we're doing the best we can, which is kind of our theme. Everybody's got a coffee, I hope. And Jen, you're all caffeined up?
Oh yes, you bet. I've got 2 little kids, so that's the only option.
Awesome. So just for everybody who's in attendance, I want to introduce Jen Wagner. She's the president of CarbonCure and my personal messiah and hero. But no, Jen is an incredibly impressive professional woman. She's president of CarbonCure. CarbonCure, she'll get into a little bit more detail than I can, but just a very impressive company leading the charge in a lot of carbon capture technology and how we can actually use the CO2 that's polluting our earth into making better and stronger products. And so she's going to go into that in depth. But I think what I really hope everybody gets a chance to take away from her presentation today is just how much of a leader she is, and the new opportunities, and not to let, even though she's from Atlantic, Canada, just like all of us, CarbonCure is based out of Halifax. I know you guys have offices everywhere, but it's an impressive. If I were to go into details, I'd probably step on your toes a lot, but I thank you very much for coming in and agreeing to do this with me. And I'll leave it up to you.
Great. So where to begin? I wish I could see everyone's face. Normally, if this was a pre-COVID world, I'd probably be standing in front of everybody. So yeah. I'll have to wing it here. But if you do have any questions, are we allowed to use the Q&A function, Sandon?
We are allowed to use the Q&A function. So any questions that come in, I'll make sure to filter, and when we have a break, I'll make sure that we get to them.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, maybe I'll just start chatting and then I'll pause in a couple of minutes so we can see if anybody wants to dive into any one area. So I'm Jennifer Wagner, president of CarbonCure. Some of you may have heard of us. We're a high growth clean tech company based out of Halifax. We've been operating for about a decade now, sort of under the radar over sort of the first few years, but just in the last few years, we've been starting to scale quite quickly and gaining some global recognition in the space. And I'll talk a little bit about how that space is changing and how we see the world taking shape as we come out of COVID, and maybe some of the opportunities that I think Atlantic Canadians are well positioned to take hold of. I think as we all know, it's a different world now, whether we like it or not. But I think that in addition to having some challenges for many people, there also presents a lot of opportunity. I know we've been on a lot of calls and panels lately talking about what we do and I think the world seems a lot smaller now than it did a year ago. So I think for companies based out of Atlanta, Canada, that presents some wonderful opportunities, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. So maybe just to kick it off, I'll kind of level set and just get everybody up to speed on who we are and what we do. So as a company, our mission is to reduce 500 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. And we set this goal about 5 years ago as sort of our North Star. So every decision we make, whether it's a big one or a small one, aligns with that mission. So it's been helpful to have that as a bit of a guiding light. And over the last, say, 5 years, we've actually scaled fairly quickly. So I started with the company 10 years ago when we were actually operating under the banner of Carbon Sense Solutions. And that was sort of a consulting company focused on carbon management for heavy emitters, but also really early tech development work in carbon utilization and concrete. And over time, sort of the technology took off, and we sort of had to make a decision. What do we want to do? Do we want to separate the companies or just put the consulting to rest? And we chose the latter. We brought in our first round of funding, which was led by Novacor, which I'm sure you all are familiar with. And then since then, we've raised 5 rounds of financing. The last, our D round, closing just a couple months ago, and you may have seen that in the news. It was co-led by Amazon and Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is the billion-dollar fund led by Bill Gates, Bloomberg, Jack Ma, every billionaire you can think of. So they co-led our latest round. But we also had it was a really strategic round for us. We had Microsoft come in, Shopify's founder, their family office, and then a couple of property tech firms. So one out of Asia, one out of Europe, and one that's global in nature. So for us, that's sort of the dream round, where we've actually been sort of working on this sort of digital play as well, sort of under the radar over the last few years, and that's kind of coming to fruition now. So having those partnerships with those tech companies is huge. There's a lot of synergies with carbon removal, which I'll talk about in a second. And then of course the property development and construction side as well, because of course a lot of these tech firms are building large campuses, which they want to be very green, in most cases being carbon neutral is their target. And then of course the property developers are building a ton of construction. So that kind of paints a picture of sort of where we see the world taking shape. Concrete, as you all know, is everywhere. The industry's been sort of plagued with this bad reputation of having a relatively high carbon footprint. The cement and concrete industry represents about between 5 and 7% of global emissions. So it's actually a pretty big number for one single industry. There's more concrete made on Earth than any other material. So they're really trying to find ways to reduce that. Our philosophy has always been that we want to design technologies that are sort of business friendly, that are easy for industry to adopt. They're not, shaking their world. We want them to continue to do what they've been doing, but just do it in a more environmentally friendly way. And also, over time, we've been able to not only offer an environmental benefit, but also offer an economic benefit to the producer, which I think has also been critical to our success. I think a lot of solutions out there, if they say, we're green, that's great, but it's going to cost you more. No thanks. So we've been able to sort of tweak the technology, tweak the business model, so that we can offer this dual value proposition of environmental and economic. And I think that's been pretty transformative for our business. Over time, we've had lots of challenges, as you can imagine. In the early days, it was around really understanding the fundamental science, the R&D, getting the solutions out of the lab and into industry. Shaw Brick was our first industrial partner, their household name in Atlanta, Canada. Without them, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. So they essentially gave us the keys to the plant and said, we understand it's not going to be perfect, but let's just get started and play around with some ideas here. The technology that we demonstrated at that point in time was, took up an entire gymnasium, and we've been able to fine tune that. And now I can hold it in my hand. It's about the size of a toaster. So it's changed pretty drastically over the last 10 years. I think what's been really interesting to see over the last, say, 18 months is, of course, two major trends. One is COVID. I mean, that's hit everybody's business in every possible way. Um, and then the second piece is this emergence of a greater recognition of climate change and how it actually is a threat. So I actually see COVID and climate change as actually being kind of parallel situations. Scientists were warning us for decades that a global pandemic was coming. Like Bill Gates has been writing about it for years. Nobody listened, and look at where we are. I think that's pretty similar to what's been happening over the last decades with climate change. And so I hope, and I'm optimistic that as we emerge from COVID and sort of go back to this new normal, that people will take climate change action a bit more seriously. So I just want to speak quickly about COVID and how that's impacted our business, because I think probably anyone around the table, whether it's on the business side or on the support side through government or agencies or public organizations, you've probably seen different angles of this, but everyone's been impacted. So back in March, when we sort of first saw the signs of this coming to North America, we had a lot of people traveling. We have a team of 60, and I would say 50% of them are traveling, more than half of their time. So we sort of grounded everybody and said, get home as quickly as you can and do the 14-day isolation, even though that wasn't actually required. That was something that we felt was the right thing to do based on the science, because we're a bunch of scientists. So that was something that we implemented right away. We really wanted to prioritize the health and safety of our people and their families, and our customers and their families. So that was the most important thing to do first. After that, we sort of shifted our thinking to securing some near-term liquidity. So in hindsight, this is probably the worst quarter to go and raise money, but that had been our plan for the last year. So we actually launched the round after the pandemic hit, and people kind of laughed in our face. They said, yeah, good luck, that's not going to happen. But we were able to get through that, luckily. But we also were able, as that was sort of moving forward, we were able to go back to some of our granting agencies who we have active contracts with, and sort of look at some flexible terms to front load some of the payments, or to forgive a couple of the loans just for a few months to give us a bit of breathing room as we locked in the financing. And I know some other companies were able to take advantage of similar opportunities. And then, of course, the federal government had a ton of programs for businesses like ours to help them get through that rough period. So that was the second sort of pillar of focus. And then the third thing was business continuity. So once we knew our people were safe and we had the cash to continue our operations, we wanted to say, okay, take a step back. The world has changed. Everything we do, throw all those plans out the window. Let's start over. Because we, as a hardware company, would fly places, shake hands, sign deals, fly an engineer in, hook up the system, stick around for a couple of days to make sure everybody was trained up, leave, come back for service calls. Like, there was it was a high touch relationship with the customer. And of course, none of that could happen. So our engineers kind of put their hands up and said, I have no idea, give me a couple of days and then we'll circle back. And luckily we have an incredible team, and they, took the weekend, came back on Monday morning, and we hashed out a plan. And I think this is probably one of the most interesting aspects of what's come out of COVID is how we install our technology is completely different now, completely different. We would used to send engineers on planes. They'd sometimes have the equipment in their suitcase and they'd hook it up. Now we still manufacture and assemble all the equipment here in Dartmouth, but then we ship the system, and our engineers get on a Zoom call with either their staff if they're able to, and if not, we contract a third party who's in the market to help them with the installation process. I don't think that would have been an option a year ago, because that was not how they did business. But since it is a different world, and since everything has gone digital, they're open to that, and it's actually been incredibly successful. It's also helped us reduce our costs drastically, and helped us to scale a lot faster. So that one engineer had to fly somewhere, settle in, meet the client, fly home. It would take at least 3 days to do one install. Now he can be sitting on his couch, looking after his kids in the early days of the pandemic when some of them were stuck at home, and do a handful a week. So it's really changed the pace in which that we can install our technology. For us, that's been the silver lining. I think one other thing I'll say about COVID too is that the world seems a lot smaller. We've been hiring like wildfire lately. I think we have 3 new people starting in the next 2 weeks. We've hired 12 in the last month. So having access to incredible talent, I think the limitation is not if you could get in a car and drive to work anymore. It's sort of the world has opened up in a lot of ways, at least for companies like ours. So we're hiring people all over North America. We're still hiring people in Atlantic Canada as well, but depending on the position, it's actually beneficial for us to have people closer to the customer. So we only have a couple of customers in Canada. Most of our customers are actually in the US. So for us, it's nice to have those resources, at least in the same time zones. It's also, COVID's presented an opportunity to get on a lot of Zoom calls, which I know at some point I have a bit of Zoom fatigue, but it's also been really nice to be able to connect with other entrepreneurs. So we're a member of the Mars Momentum program out of Toronto. We're a member of the Elemental Accelerator program out of Hawaii. And I just got word yesterday that we're accepted to 2 other accelerator programs, which I can't talk about, but I think it's a really interesting opportunity because everybody's at home. And so, whether it's a little, round table on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or if it's just connecting over beers with some of these other entrepreneurs, it's been really fun and actually super valuable to connect with them in a more regular cadence. Whereas, the limitation a couple of years ago was I got to fly to Hawaii once a year to see these people and shake their hands, but we can do something like once a month now. So we have that sort of tighter connection now, which is really nice. And I think the same thing goes for mentors as well. That's something that I personally have always prioritized, is having mentors for me in my professional development. And those people are also a lot more accessible now, just because they are also at home. So I think that's been a really nice change for us. Is that a good starting point, Sandon? I have a couple other things I want to say more about sort of how I see the landscape changing around climate change, but maybe I'll just pause to see if there's any questions or comments.
Okay, so yeah, if anybody has any questions, please fire them up. We didn't have any come through. I do have a couple though that can probably get the squeaky wheels going, I suppose. I think you kind of, I shouldn't say you glossed over it. I mean, you gave a lot of detail, but maybe if we can go back to the venture capital piece, because I know a lot of businesses around here, VC isn't a big presence in Northern New Brunswick, in the more rural areas and things like that. So, and I think maybe if you could kind of just give a little bit of detail about, the journey with InnovaCorp and some of these raises and maybe a more rudimentary definition of what it means, because I think maybe there's a little bit of hesitance around here to, try to start something as bold and ambitious as CarbonCure. And because it's thinking, well, I don't have $5 million to sink into a prototype, right? But, that's the type of thing that, we are trying to get off the ground with the seed VC or micro one going on. But it would be, maybe just kind of tell the story about how that idea came and got initially funded.
Yeah, and just to be clear, our first prototype didn't cost $5 million either. It cost, $1,000. I think you have different needs at different stages of your company's growth. We're at a fairly late stage now, so our needs are a lot greater. We're raising large sums of money. We have a team of 65. We were traveling a lot, so our costs are relatively higher than some of the earlier stage companies in Atlantic Canada. I will say too that our solution is very capital light, so you'd be surprised by the numbers probably if you heard them, because our equipment is relatively inexpensive. So a lot of the other folks who are doing the similar things to what we're doing in the industry require, $50 million every time they want to service a new market because they have to build a new plant. We don't have to do that. We're building all of our equipment out of Dartmouth and, shipping these small boxes around the world. So I think we are unique in that way. But yeah, I mean, we definitely were walking before we're running now. And I think in the early days, if I sort of rewind 5 or 10 years, we were just trying to make the technology work. We weren't worried about like global domination. We were just, can we get a system to work? Can we understand the fundamental science? So what we were doing at that point in time was very different than what we're doing today. So we, had a few co-op students who were running some demos in the lab. There's a ton of grant funding available to support those types of arrangements. Some of them are even almost free. I know we had a great experience with an organization, and if anyone wants the link, I can send it to them. It was like an Indigenous matchmaking program with some students on the West Coast. And so we had this awesome student for a 4-month period, and it was 100% covered. So that's kind of like a no-brainer. The programs are available. You just have to know where to look. And so in the early days, we were leveraging a lot of those programs, like subsidizing student funding, because we just didn't have a lot of cash at that point. Industry partnerships was also a big piece of that. So again, when you're cash strapped, we needed, organizations like Shaw or like a local architect or whoever it was to partner with us to help us, write a paper or test out the concrete or, just write a case study, get something started. And we knew that it wasn't perfect, but at least it was a step in the right direction. I think that's a philosophy that we've always used is don't let like perfection get in the way of progress because you'll never get anywhere.
So
And
I want to just,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Jen. I want to just stop right there because we do still have some, well-established industrial players in the region. So if you just expand a little bit, and actually we have a Shaw pellet plant of all things in Beltune. So what's what advice would you give on how to structure those kind of, partnerships? What are these businesses looking for in terms of incentives or motivation in order to kind of partner to try and get a company like CarbonCure or something in a similar vein off the ground?
Yeah, I think for us, like mission alignment was always really important. We never wanted to work with early adopters that made us feel like vendors, because like we didn't have like a customer service team and the technology wasn't perfect. I think if an industry player is looking for that, like don't talk to a startup. I think if you need to find those companies who understand where you are in the evolution of your technology development and recognize the value that it could bring in the future. And that's what I mean by mission alignment. So, Shaw Group, and there was another one in Ontario called Atlas Block. They were mission aligned in understanding that they needed to, as an industry, take action on reducing their carbon footprint. And that came from the top, like their CEO, their management team understood that. And so they were willing to work with us in the very early stages and understanding that what they saw would not be the same as what they would probably buy in a few years' time. It really was a demonstration. And I think you have to have that mission alignment to be on the same page. I think if you're not, then it's just not going to work.
Okay, no, that's great. And sorry, I interrupted you. I'll let you keep going.
Oh, I can't even remember what I was saying. It probably wasn't that important. I was just rambling.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah,
Rambling is always good.
The key point is like, depending on what your needs are at where you are in your evolution, like they will be different. So like, leveraging student programming, grant programming in the early days, industry partnerships, and then kind of moving forward from there. Like, Innovacore led our first round, and that was awesome. We had some leveraged money from SDTC, which is like a federal funding program for clean tech. Okay. They still exist, and they're still, I think they have active calls for proposals. And then there's some regional stuff that we've done over the years too. So Ontario had a big push for some clean tech grant opportunities, and then Alberta still does as well. So I think if you can look for those opportunities that are either sector specific or regional specific, then that can kind of get you to the next round, and then when you're ready, down the road, think about like more aggressive VC funding.
Okay. So, I mean, yeah, so we've talked a little bit about funding. We've talked about innovation in clean tech a little bit today. And what you were touching on, especially when you were talking about how work is changing because of COVID and the ability to work remotely and stay from home, and how that's becoming a trend and has actually removed a lot of costs from you guys. It's allowed you to scale a lot faster. One of the things that, and we discussed this yesterday, one of the things that I wanted to come in, we do have a burgeoning female entrepreneur segment of the population in Northern New Brunswick. And, I kind of certainly wanted to bring you in just because you're a mom, you're a wife, but you're also a badass executive. And just how that balance has, the initial challenges of it as you dealt with them, and what that means now in the age of COVID. Has it gotten easier? Has it gotten harder? What do you think?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I know there's been some papers on this, that women have tended to take on more of the burden of COVID. And of course, there's exceptions, but generally speaking, that's happened. And I can even see that in sort of our house. My husband also has a fairly demanding job. He's an academic, and he wants to do his research. And so who's worried about getting the kids lunch ready, or doing the laundry or whatever? It's usually me. So that's presented an opportunity to have some pretty constructive conversations, and we've been able to get through that, and we're moving forward. But I think a lot of women, they've been trying to work and look after the kids. We're very lucky in Atlantic Canada. Most of the schools and daycares are open. A lot of parts of the world, that's not the case. I mean, just the other day, I was on a call with a colleague in LA, and his kid was zipping by in the back, and I was like, what? He's still home? I forgot about that, right? Like, we've kind of gone back to a bit something closer to resembling normal. But I know a lot of women around the world are sort of faced with that extra burden. So, I mean, you can't change that overnight. I think it's more of sort of a systemic problem, but more broadly, women in tech, I think we have made some headway there. The stats are still not great. Like, if you look at, there's a Silicon Valley study from last year that said, whatever it is, like 48% of tech teams don't even have one female on their management team, like not even one, which I think is crazy. And then the stats, as you get to like the founder and CEO, it's like 5% or less are led by females. And then there's some pretty bad stats around like raising money as a female founder. So I think there's a lot of challenges that they've been faced with. And so some women may be disincentived to launch that idea that they've been thinking of. But there are a lot of really wonderful programs that have launched over the last few years. I know Mars has a Women in Clean Tech Challenge. I think they're at the stage where they have like their final 10 winners. So that's drummed up a lot of interest. There's the, SheEO. I think BDC has a female founder fund. There's a Sandpiper out of Halifax. That's that new Atlantic Women's Venture Fund that's launched. So I think there's a growing recognition that we do need more attention on this, and that women can be incredible leaders, especially in clean tech, where this is such an important topic. So I'm really passionate about this, and I've tried to, get mentors of females who've, sort of blazed the trail ahead of me. But I'm also offering to help other women who are sort of just getting started, and that's been really energizing for me to help give back.
No, that's great. And the stats you brought up, obviously, where COVID's also given us this opportunity to be reflective on, who we are as a society on many different issues. One of them is that I think maybe doesn't get quite as much press, not that it, it's a competition, but we should be spending some time, is how do we, support female entrepreneurs and, having that brilliant idea, that aha or eureka moment. It just seems like we've probably missed out on some great inventions over, the decades, just because, of the systemic, way that we handle entrepreneurship. So if you, two pieces of advice, let's say lo-fi, you know, easy, low-hanging fruit for any female entrepreneur or female leader out there in order to kind of bolster their own professional goals, or tips that you would give that have helped you be stronger in your role?
I think it's three things. So the first one is the most important. And this was a piece of advice that a finance professor, when I was doing my MBA, gave to me. And I wanted to ask him advice for something. And he was this guy who had like a long ponytail, a little bow tie, and he was a really quirky guy, but he was super smart and really successful. And I said, I'd like you to help me with some advice as I'm sort of mapping out my career. And he says, if you can't answer this question, don't even bother talking to me. And it was, tell me three people who you want to replace. Like, what is their name? What is their title? And where do they work? And so I thought that was kind of interesting. At first I was like, well, who cares? But then I was like, that actually makes a ton of sense, because it forces you to think about where you want to take your career. And so I brought him three names, and then we were able to have a conversation. But I've always used that. And I continue to do that today. Who are the three people that I would like to replace eventually? And then that helps me kind of map out where I need to go. And then that leads me to the second piece of advice, which is get a mentor. I've always had a handful of mentors, and you have different mentors at different stages of your career, but I think it's really important to have that sort of sounding board for bouncing ideas around, getting advice and input on where you want to take your career next. And then the third piece is get a network. And again, I do this all the time. And actually, Sandon, you know that you're part of my network. And I found that really valuable to have that sort of peer group, because as a leader, sometimes it can be kind of lonely at the top. If you're having some challenges or don't have anywhere to turn on your team, where do you go? And so having this peer network available to provide support and help you get through some of those challenging times has been really, really valuable to me. So I would encourage people to do that as well.
Okay, that's awesome. And I can't stress enough that last point. If you have a peer network, a group of friends who understand what you're going through because they're going through it too, obviously that makes a huge difference in just your ability to cope, thrive, and succeed, for sure. Even though thrive and succeed are kind of synonyms. But anyway, it's early. I think I wanted just to step back a little bit. And so we've talked about it from the female leader's perspective, and maybe for the men on the call and that'll watch this webinar in recording history and stuff like that, what recommendations could you give for making, for attracting and supporting great female talent within an organization? And what kind of changes can you make in an organization that maybe hasn't had a good track record, maybe not intentionally, but hasn't has long missed that aspect of their business? What kind of changes can those people make?
I like that question. So on the advice piece, this is something that I do as a white woman, is as I'm kind of navigating decisions, I try to reflect on whether I have these like unconscious biases that I'm applying to the situation. And I think everybody should do that at all times. So when you're hiring or when you're making decisions about who to promote or what to pay someone, like just kind of ask yourself that question, like take that pause, like why am I making this decision? Am I being equitable and fair to all of the candidates and so on? So I kind of challenge myself that way. In terms of attracting, supporting, and retaining, I think it comes back to this like diversity, equity, and inclusion, which to me are three really different things. So the diversity would be the attracting the people, like look around the table. Are you guys diverse? Or guys and gals? Um, are you where you need to be? And so like for us as an organization, we recognized about a year ago that we all kind of look the same. And so we had to take proactive steps in order to change that. And we still have some work to do, but we've made a ton of progress. So that's the attracting diversity piece. Um, the equity piece is sort of the supporting piece. So once you have those people in your organization, how do you ensure that they have the same opportunities as everybody else? And that sort of takes an entirely different set of skills. And then the inclusion piece is on the sort of retaining side, where it's okay, you've brought them into your organization, you're supporting them. How do you ensure that you keep them there and that you're listening to what they're saying and that you're not just ticking the box? So I think diversity and equity and inclusion require different strategies. And I think if you truly believe that those things are important to your business, which you should, then it should be part of every decision that you make. And one other piece of advice I would say is recognize when you're not an expert. Like I recognize that I'm not an expert in this area, but I know that I need to find someone who is, and those people are available, and so they can help guide you through that process. And again, not so it's like, I'll pay someone X dollars and write a report and let it sit on my desk. Like that doesn't really achieve anything. You want it to be sort of a cultural change within your organization and more broadly within the community.
Oh, that's great. And I think, exactly. There are experts out there. There are people that you can talk to. I know, a lot of people see it as a challenge, but it's very much an enriching process. Your company will be stronger in the end because of it. And for, I think, a lot of organizations around here, too much of our economy flows through government. I can, easily predict that there will be a BIPOC requirement in your proposals in the very near future. So if you are a business that looks to do government bids and stuff like that, not only is it something you should do morally, but even from a business standpoint, it's going to be something that I think is going to be required, just due to societal pressure on, I don't want my tax dollars going to, pay the whitest corporation in the world to do a job that a diverse one could.
And just
So,
on that point too, Sandy, like anecdotally, there's been a few examples where we get, especially after we raise a round of financing, we get a bunch of inbound requests like, I want to help you with this, I want to help you with that, I want to sell you this, I want to sell you that. The first thing I usually do is go on their team page. And I've actually said no to people before to say, we're prioritizing DEI right now, and I don't like the look of your team page. Everybody looks the same. There's no diverse opinions on your, I mean, I say it nicely, but that's kind of the gist is I'm just saying, this is really important to us. And so if you want to work with us, we need that mission alignment and that cultural fit to move forward.
okay. No, and that's great. Just so everybody's there, we got about 13 people in the queue right now. If you want to ask a question, I know Zoom webinars are still kind of new for some people. If you roll your mouse over top of the screen, down towards the bottom, there is a button that says Q&A. Please feel free to submit a question. I'll ask Jen. Jen will give you an amazing answer and change your life, and you'll be happy you did it. One of the last things that I want to talk to you, and hopefully we get a few questions coming in, attracting remote workers. So we live in, where I live, it's Northern New Brunswick. We have an elderly population, a lot of retirees. We're losing a lot of young people. We'd love to attract them back. I mean, ultimately that's the goal, or attract new ones in. But if I wanted to, say, grow a tech company or even a clean tech company or fintech, whatever segment you wanted, how have you guys gone about addressing the issue of having to recruit remotely? And how have you done that effectively?
Yeah, so we have been hiring like fairly quickly now, and I kind of mentioned, so we have our technical center is in Dartmouth, so that's where we do all of our R&D, all of our engineering, all of our prototyping, and all of our assembly. So we continue to hire people in that space locally. We hire a ton from the local universities, and we also have brought in people from around the world to lead up different projects for us who have like a very specific area of expertise. And so that in itself presents some challenges, with like immigration and where's Halifax, coming from like Switzerland or wherever it is, right?
Yeah.
But I think that can be overcome. I think especially now, Atlantic Canada looks pretty good. If I was living really, in the middle of Chicago or whatever, and somebody offered me a job in Atlantic Canada, I'd probably say yes. So I think we have a bit of a window of opportunity where we can use the Atlantic bubble success as a bit of an awesome data point. Come here and be safe. But of course, that is such a temporary opportunity. So we can try and leverage that in the near term. But attracting remote workers and onboarding them is pretty tough. We tend to use recruiters because we seem to be looking for very specific types of people. But we also hire through our network all the time. And I think getting them in the door is one thing, but then onboarding them remotely, we're kind of still navigating that now. I mean, just this afternoon, I have our annual all-team retreat, and we have about 30 new people who have never laid eyes on anybody in real life. So there are ways to do that, but I don't think it's a quick fix. And I think even if it's not a new person, just sort of keeping that person engaged, keeping them motivated, making them feel connected with the team, like that's not easy. But luckily, every other organization in the world is trying to navigate this right now. So there are some, tips and tricks that a lot of companies have used to help with that. So we, just as a few examples, like we use Slack, so people are chatting all day long. We have regular all-team meetings like every 2 weeks with our CEO. It's like a town hall style meeting. And we have a goal framework that we use that's all shared, so everybody can see what everybody's doing at any given time. Like what is your one metric this quarter that you want to drive home, and you can see everybody else's, so you know what everyone's kind of working on. So that helps people stay connected. And then we do some more fun stuff like happy hours or trivia nights or whatever it is, just to get people talking about stuff that's not work. And then of course there's a bunch of really good examples of companies who have done that really well, mostly in tech, because they've been working remotely for a long time. I know a lot of those large tech companies, they never plan to go back to work the way we used to. I think Twitter has indefinitely closed their offices. I think Shopify has as well. So that's going to change the way people engage through work. But I think in terms of attracting top talent to Atlantic Canadian companies, like that presents a real opportunity because it doesn't really matter where people live. So I think on the flip side, it'll be more competitive. But if you can attract those people to your team, then sort of now's the chance. Like maybe a couple of years ago we couldn't have done that, but this year we can.
And would you recommend, if you have a specific role in mind, and basically it has a list of qualifications, so you know exactly what you want, does that specificity help? And if that's the case, does that make it a bit more attractive of an option to use a recruiter when you can say, you go out and you get me this, exact list?
I think it depends on the stage. So again, like we're later stage, like we're hiring pretty specific functions because we're hiring a lot of people. Like 10 years ago, we were hiring one person a year, and that person did a lot of stuff. And those jobs never got posted. Like many early stage companies, I think the best jobs you just kind of hear about through your network. So I think that's where having those mentors and building out those networks, doesn't matter what stage you're in, you can just kind of meet somebody and say, I think you'd be a really good fit for my organization to do XYZ. What do you think? And then 6 months later, they're on your team. I think it feels a bit more organic, and I think our best hires have been found that way. I think it's a different situation when you're, at a point where you need somebody for finance or somebody for marketing or somebody for sales. So yeah, I would just encourage people to use the opportunities that COVID has presented to be able to connect with those people who you maybe wouldn't otherwise.
Okay, good. We actually did get a question from Frederic Lefrancois. The first question of the webinar. So Frederic, we're going to get you, when we get our swag in, you're definitely getting a mug. So thank you for that. Frederic asks, what new ways of running your business developed because of COVID, and which ones will you try to keep? And what do you think will be the challenges, if you see any, of trying to keep them in a post-COVID world?
Right. So I think the main two things for us are the remote installation. So we do have a hardware component to our offering. So I would like to maintain that post-COVID. I think that sort of need to do everything remotely will erode over time, and will slowly trickle back to the way things were. I don't think it'll ever really get back to that same, traveling for 15 conferences a year. I don't think we'll get to that point again. But I think we will sort of revert back to handshakes and, having meetings over beer or whatever it is. I would like to preserve that as best we can, because it does make a ton of sense for us to scale more quickly. So as long as we can continue to offer great service in a remote way, I think we'll be able to do that. The other thing that we've had to do is really beef up our internal communications with our team. Because we can't get people on planes, we would meet people, internally, our team members at conferences, or we'd have joint meetings in market with customers, or we'd bring everybody to Nova Scotia once a year for an all team. We can't do any of those things. So we have had to put in place a few new ways to keep the team connected. I don't think that'll change, because now there's an expectation that we talk every Friday, or X happens on Monday and this happens on the first day of the quarter. So we have this new sort of cadence of communication internally that I think we will continue with.
Oh, that's great. And it brings us to 9:15. So we've done the full shot. It didn't seem like I learned a lot, and I've been lucky enough to know Jen for we're going on 4 years now.
At least, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I think obviously if some questions come up, Jen, would you mind me forwarding them on to you?
For sure.
Excellent.
Happy to do that. Yeah.
And maybe if you have a few closing thoughts to bring us home on, maybe your hopes and dreams for the next 2 years, and where people should be focusing some energy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic about the future. I think it's been a really challenging time for a lot of people in every possible way. But I think as a society, it's forced us to think about how we run our daily lives, how we run our businesses, how we, scale companies out of Atlantic Canada. And I think some of those lessons are kind of the silver lining. I think we're a better business because of COVID. And I would encourage people to, as best they can, try to see the forest or through the trees, and just try to get through the next little while. Don't wait for things to return to normal, because they probably won't. So if you can pivot now, don't waste any time changing how you do what you do, then you'll be better for it.
That's perfect. All right. Well, thank you again so much. We got another comment from Frederic. Great talk, very inspiring. Congratulations on all your success, and thank you. So, you know what? He said it as best as I could. Thank you so much, Jen. I know you have a big day ahead of you with your all team kind of hybrid. I guess I'm assuming that some people are going to be calling in.
It's on Zoom, so it's the best thing we can do. But we're gonna make the most of it. We're gonna have a fun. We have a happy hour at the end, so that'll be nice to cap off the day. But it's not the same as in person, that's for sure.
All right. Well, thank you again so much, and next time. I hope next time down the line when we're doing these in person in northern New Brunswick, you can come up and spend some time, and we'll have to drag Mike out of the Nipisquit River or something like that.
That'd be great. Thanks so much, Sandon.
All right. Thanks so much. All right.
Enjoy your day.
Bye, Jen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.